And here we go for round 2 this week of the Titus and Sergio Variety Hour podcast. My name's Sergio Paradise, and here's the bloke, you know him. He was spotted at $1.05 to be eating a pie halfway through the match the other week. Titus O'Reilly.
Oh, how are we? Well, I want to say a big thank you up front to our people who became supporters this week. We had a bunch more. So for those that don't know, you can become a supporter of our podcast. Help us keep doing this nonsense.
Yes.
You could give your money to a charity. Or you could give it to us, and we manage it much like the Shane Warne Foundation once did.
The O'Reilly Foundation, where 0% goes to a charity.
So you can get on to titusoreilly.com. There's a support little section there, and thank you to people that do support us, because you enable us to keep doing this and not have to put it behind paywalls or any of that sort of nonsense. And it supports my writing too, so not just the podcast.
Now, did I see, before we intro our guest this week,
yes,
that your interview with Dane Swan at the Yarraville Club, second show by public demand?
Oh,
is that correct?
Has it been announced?
I saw it last night. I nearly dropped my phone.
Oh, they haven't told me that.
Second show.
I knew the first one is pretty much sold out. I think there's a couple of seats left, so I think there is a second show in the works. So,
and it's the same. It's the same night.
We're doing a second show later on.
So the jokes that don't work in the first show,
they'll get cut.
You just cut for the second one.
It'll be a better but it'll be a shorter but better show.
Yeah.
So no, that should be
massive.
Good. So thanks, and again, that's going to be fun because I literally have no restrictions on what I can ask. And I've never met Dane Swan. So
and Swan would be the sort of bloke who wouldn't have a problem with that, I'd imagine.
I also have not watched a single second of him on the Jungle Show.
On the Jungle Show. He's going along quietly on the Jungle Show.
Is he?
Maybe a bit too quietly.
Oh, right.
I think
you don't think he's going to win?
Yeah, maybe a bit in the background.
Oh, well, what an honour to win that show.
he's in good footsteps behind.
Now we should get to our guests because they've been very patient. They've come all the way out to...
They have. They've come all the way out to Studio Titus. So, yeah, our guest, how would we describe her? She's an author, a broadcaster, a presenter, an MC, a producer.
A legend of sport.
A legend of sport. An Adelaide Crows fanatic. What else can we say about her?
Oh, that's a lot.
It's a fair bit, isn't it? She's also, as I said at the start, she's an author. She's just come out with her second book. It's called Breaking the Mould, Taking a Hammer to Sexism in Sport. So let's welcome her to the Variety Hour, Titus. It's Angela Pippos.
Oh, welcome.
We'll drop in the applause sound effect in post.
It is indeed an honour to be here with you two fine gentlemen this morning. It's fantastic.
That entire sentence is a lie.
Just don't call me a veteran of sport. Others have.
Legends,
really?
okay.
Legends, okay, but veteran just makes me sound so old.
I know, but in sport, being a veteran means you're like 20. You know, late 20s, you're instantly a veteran in sport.
Yeah, the thing is, I haven't actually played at the highest level yet.
Yeah, that's right. Don't give up your dream.
Neither's Peter Ford, but he was upset the other day of being described as veteran entertainment reporter Peter Ford.
Oh, really?
Well, Peter's about 77.
Well, they shit you in the entertainment business if you get above a certain age, so I can understand why
there.
But anyway, look, I have been knocking around in sport for 20 years, so I guess I do qualify as a veteran.
And you are a great sports fan, and look... Before we get into the book, I've read most of the book, I've got to say.
Well, you had someone read it to you.
I got one of the staff to read it and just praise it for me.
Like those study notes you get in Year 12.
Exactly. Is a great... I think the book starts really well, Ange, when you talk about playing sport in the backyard with your brother. And everyone can relate to that, whether brothers or not, or any kind of sibling. Playing sport in the backyard is, for most Australians, the first time you ever actually play sport, because you're usually too young to be doing it at an organised level. Take us back to those days. Cricket in the backyard, what else?
Cricket, footy, but even if we couldn't get our hands on, a cricket bat, find some stumps, whatever, we would invent our games. So this is what refined our skills. We had our version of Bradman's, water tank game. We would use the stem of the rotary clothesline and just throw a tennis ball and see which way it jutted out and take the spectacular slips catches.
Yeah.
So we would do this every night after school just to become better at catching. And Mum would stand there at the kitchen window and say, come in, for dinner, and we would wait 3 or 4 times before Mum said it, before we'd leave.
Until it got too dark to actually see the ball.
Absolutely, but that's what we did. Chris and I were so close, and we still are really close. We bonded over sport. When we weren't playing it, we were talking about it. But those slips catches were famous in our family, and we would have a list on the fridge of our classic catches, and I was always leading. I was always leading.
How did he cop that? Well, you know what brothers can be like with their sisters in a sporting sense. Yeah, they'll have them along for the ride, but they're not necessarily going to want them to be better at it than them.
He's 3 years younger than me. So I guess he just...
The big sister.
He just did his sibling duty and he worshipped me.
Fair enough.
He worshipped the ground that I walked on. And, he believed that I would play netball for Australia because I told him that I was good enough. He was my number one fan, with everything that I did. And, on a serious note, that my equality was instilled in us at a young age because we did everything together. My sporting pursuits were valued as highly as his. So we'd go and watch him play footy. He'd come and watch me play netball. We'd take each other's stats and we just lived and breathed it as equals. And, kicking the footy in the backyard, so many girls did it and we were good at it but had nowhere to play footy properly.
Oh, exactly. And just at what point did you decide that probably you're not going to play netball for Australia? Because everyone goes through that as a kid. You're either going to open the batting for Australia, you're going to play centre half forward for Melbourne or Carlton or Collingwood. But there comes a time where you have to look yourself in the eye and go, you know what, not good enough.
Oh, last year I thought that.
Last year. Only just last year. Yeah.
I felt like that for a long time. I suddenly realised I wasn't going to ever play for Melbourne.
Yeah.
But then over the last 10 years, I started to realise it might become a chance. When I saw some that they turned out. Now, reading your book, I've read your book, unlike Serge, who got this help to read it. I was shocked to learn that there is sexism in sport by reading this book.
It's a huge revelation, I know.
And I also was surprised to learn that women both like sport and can play it.
It's outrageous.
It is
I know.
amazing.
Who would have thought?
Did you know that, Serge?
Well, no, I thought the original working title was Back in the Kitchen Where They Belong.
Well, I saw Graham Corns on radio, and he's become a real... he's a bit stuck in against women's sports in a few ways. I think he said...
And I love the way he backpedals now.
Well,
he's no
but
good
he
at
keeps
it.
saying new things, so it's sort of like one step forward, 2 steps backwards. But he came out last year and said something about it just didn't look right. Women playing Aussie rules just didn't look right, which is just, to me, there's no reason given for it. Just like, it's the vibe. It's the vibe.
Well, I think he did dig a bigger hole for himself. Yeah, he was talking about the look, and maybe it was the uniforms, the cut of the uniforms. And then he went a step further and mentioned boobs.
Yeah.
Like, how's that going to work? Women with boobs running around playing footy. Like, Graham.
It's something I'm still getting my head around. How's it ever going to work? He came out this week and said that he thought that they should get rid of tackling in the women's game.
Right.
And I was like, that's the whole reason a lot of these women want to play.
But what was Cornsey's reason? What? Because there's been a couple of dodgy tackles lately.
But that's makes him feel uncomfortable. These are often people projecting other issues that are not about the thing. But I was like, that's the one at the moment. My view of the AFL women so far has been, I've been impressed that the standard has got, I think, better each round. Like that first round, when you look back at it now, was, there was a lot of drop marks, a lot of not hitting targets.
And there's a lot of first game nerves.
You can tell there was the adrenaline rush, and the second round was much better. In the third round, there was some really actually just good skills and good game, and it's just so you're just seeing it get better. And the thing people don't get is a lot of these women have played like 3 games of AFL in their life of Aussie rules. Like they've come out of frisbee and...
Well, that's right, but a lot of them had the pathway ripped out from under their feet from the age of 14 to 18. So if you take 4 years out of anyone's sporting career, and there's a little bit of catching up to do.
Yeah.
And Graham and others who have a problem with women and physicality, just get over it. It's okay if women are playing against other women that they crash into each other. It's okay to tackle.
They want to,
and
though.
they want to.
You see it. The one thing I was going to say is, like, while I feel that the skills in the AFL women are not there, and what I don't mean is, I'm not trying to compare them to the men's, because the men's have had hundreds of years and pipelines that have been set up for years, and they've got they full-time
pathways and academies.
But I'm talking where I think the AFL women's will get to. The skillfulness of the AFL women in 5 years will be unrecognisable, I think, to now. But the one thing I think they've had from day one is the physical nature, the tackling. Has all been there. Like, you can't. The bit that a lot of when you read the history of women's sport that people used to worry about was, could women handle the physicality of the sport? They didn't talk about could they hit a target. That wasn't the concern, was it? It was always a woman, if she sweats, will die. It was kind of the medical best knowledge we had at the time.
Her uterus will fall out if she, if she runs a marathon. A lot if she runs a marathon and stuff like that.
That doesn't seem to have happened yet.
I know. Who would have thought? So the thing about physicality,
think about women rumbling. I think it right. Goes back.
Look, it's really hard to undo old ways of thinking, but we are getting there as a society. We're evolving and realising that it's okay for women to play traditionally masculine sports. But I've had the pleasure of filming a documentary about the rise of women and girls in Australian rules. Yeah. And I interviewed a lot of little girl Oz kickers and junior footy players. And to a girl, they all said to me the thing that they love about footy is the tackling and the physicality, right? That's what draws them in. So on the one hand, they may have heard society's messaging about, it's not okay for a girl to do it, but that's what they want to do. They want to tackle. They love playing footy in the mud. All the stuff that boys say, girls are saying as well. And even more than that, their parents have said that it's helped them with other parts of their lives to show that physicality, to have an outlet. They've become more confident and they're better with their siblings and schoolmates, and it's really been good for their development as a whole to be a bit more physical. So I think it's a really interesting social study, watching the girls adapt to it really quickly.
And I'll tell you something that I've noticed in the last just couple of months being involved with junior footy. Old blokes like Cornsey and like ourselves will struggle for a time before he probably gets his head around it. But where it has changed in a social sense, young boys and boys who play footy now in underage, they've just immediately accepted it. Yeah. It's like if you'd said to them 2 years ago, hey boys, training's off at 5:30, you got to be off because the girls are coming on, there'd have been, what? Now, it just happens, we're going to be off at 5:30, girls are coming on now. And amongst 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, it's just, and I think this is just young people are more adaptable, and when something new comes along, they just accept it. It's old blokes who have got a problem with it.
Well, it's becoming normal. I mean, that's the weird thing is it's women playing sport and then a whole bunch of other things. Like when I was growing up, the basic model for understanding male and females or sexuality regarding sport was no homosexuals played sport in the men's, none of them, and all women that played sport were lesbians. And we're learning that might not be a sophisticated enough model. We're actually learning that actually
those couple of generalisations maybe a bit.
I mean, that's how it was thought of. Like, it was that. I mean, you kind of look at some of these things and they're laughable in their simplicity. Like, they actually don't. But to give you an idea, that this fear of, and partly from reading your book and some of the things I've read over the years that I've always found kind of, they're amusing but kind of horrible because they kind of lead us to where we are today. This fear that women's bodies were about to fall apart if they did anything that involved anything above a walk or involved sweating, was both unseemly but an actual physical threat to their lives. This was and there was a committee I was reading before about, in Australia, there was a committee set up by the government to investigate the benefits of physical education for girls. So, as they put it, to decide whether, should girls be allowed to do physical education? So this is 1922, and they came up with several recommendations looking at what sports were and were not appropriate for them to play based on the level of fitness required. They worked out that some individual girls, for medical reasons, should not be allowed to participate in tennis, netball, lacrosse, golf, hockey, and cricket. So they're saying for medical reasons.
Oh, that golf will take it out of you.
Oh, and so that was just golf. So that was one thing. Now, football was this committee ruled. You'd be surprised to learn, Angela, that men were on this committee mainly.
Really?
You'd be surprised to learn that.
And they sat around a mahogany table?
Yeah, exactly. And they also announced that football was completely medically inappropriate for girls to play. Like, medically. This wasn't like even... They didn't even pretend it was just their view.
I'm surprised that they even considered it in 1922.
Yeah, that is kind of amazing.
Football.
Well, probably some pesky woman asked them to.
Yeah. Golf and lacrosse, I can understand.
They said it was medically appropriate for all girls to be participate in, so long as it was not done in an overly competitive manner. This is what they said. They said that they could compete in, as long as it wasn't in an overly competitive manner, swimming, rowing, cycling, and horseback riding.
Right. Oh, see, that's not good for the uterus.
Saddle.
And riding a bike, we can't be doing that as well.
So that was that's the thing that goes back like a long time, is just not even it didn't even get to a stage of a discussion of equality or should they. It was like, we're protecting the women from hurting themselves here. And
not based on any medical research. This was just pure, unadulterated sexism. Yeah. That's all it is. We live in a patriarchal society. Sport is men's business, and we'll just throw out a few of these really flaky reasons why you can't do it and just perpetuate the sexism. I mean, it's hilarious. And my book has, funny examples of excuses given as to why women should not participate. And it is just hilarious, Well,
it's both hilarious and kind of depressing, isn't it? Because these ideas linger with us.
Yes, and you mentioned Australian football and how it was interesting that they were even talking about it in 1922. But, women have played this great game of ours sporadically for 100 years. So when men went to war...
Women's footy leagues, hasn't there? A lot of people just think it just started 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, no.
It's been going for many years.
81 was the first official kind of league.
Yes, so 1981 was the formation of the Victorian Women's Football League. But up until then, they played sporadically. But they played for charity reasons. Men go to war, women played footy to raise a bit of money to help the troops.
To help the men go to war.
That's right. Yeah. And there was interest from VFL players over time. They got involved, and the men supported women, but not to the point of helping them form their own league. So there were always obstacles. So there were these little matches on the side while men were away. But really it took until 1981 for things to get serious. But then when that happened, the VWFL, the women playing in those days, and they started with 4 teams in Victoria, they felt ashamed and embarrassed about playing footy. Debbie Lee, the wonderful Debbie Lee, has spoken to me about this. She would be playing kick to kick out on the street and would hide behind the bushes when a car came past, because she just felt that she was doing something that was wrong, that society said she couldn't be doing. And, anyone who saw Deb play, I mean, physicality, she had it in bucket loads and just loved this sport. But unfortunately, the sport did not reciprocate that love. And, it was a real struggle in the early years for those players. And good on them for sticking with it. I mean, Debbie now runs the women's footy at Melbourne. And these women, and Peter Sell and others, they stuck with the code despite, it not helping them along much. And they're now working in it. They've shown so much love for it that they've stayed involved, and we are better for it.
My theory with this fear of women being injured or not being able to handle the pain levels, I've got no proof of this, but I think it goes back to men used to not be allowed in the delivery room. So we had this, we were at the pub having a cigar. Ever since you let any man into that delivery room, they're going to start going, they can handle it. They can handle football. I don't know why we're treating them like delicate flowers. They're tough.
Yeah, you're right.
A hip and shoulder isn't going to worry you too much.
Shoulders, like, have you seen it?
Her shirt front, no problem.
What amazes me is how, and you run through some of this, is just there's the on the field women not being encouraged to play. So from not being seen as being physically up to it to not being seen as it being ladylike. You know, this threatening that they're too masculine and no one will like them and that sort of thing. But then they've also been in many ways, in AFL or Australian rules football, they've always been a big component from very early days of the supporting group. But even in that, they were excluded from a whole bunch of ways of, there were sort of almost different levels of supporting that they couldn't access. And one of those I found interesting in your book was, I hadn't realised it was this recently, is the MCG long room where Serge spends all his time.
Yes.
And he still complains about this decision. It wasn't until 1984 that they'd let women in.
That's right.
Which, you know...
Did you protest that?
I didn't protest it. And look, to be honest...
It has ruined the atmosphere.
If I'm brutally honest, it hasn't ruined the atmosphere.
Not as much as when you see a Collingwood supporter wander in there.
Oh, exactly.
That's where
we still do our best at the MCC to keep them out. But, you know, it didn't ruin the atmosphere of the long room. It did help that they rebuilt the long room with the new stand at the MCC. If they'd kept the old one, it would have been a lot more, or probably a lot easier to keep the women out.
No one would want to go into it. But it is amazing, only 1984.
Yeah.
And that was about the same time,
And that's a pretty symbolic room, right? That's not, you know, there's lots of things women weren't allowed to do, but there's a very big symbol that, you are not welcome.
But in all seriousness,
in sport.
Yes.
It was about that time that women could only become full members of the MCC. It was the mid-80s. It was probably 84.
And cricket and golf have had these policies for centuries, and just excluding women because of the atmosphere. The reason given was always it would ruin the atmosphere of the room or the club or whatever. It was like, we're not going to be running around nude. It's okay.
Can't have whiskey and a cigar. You don't want the chicks around, you know.
But yeah, it's not that long ago, is it?
It's
The
not.
1980s. And there was robust debate about it, of course, and there were lots of attempts for it to happen. But it was really only when sort of political interest groups got involved when these things started to change. I mean, the change, the motivation wasn't coming from within cricket and within golf. It was other external bodies saying, you know, come on, you've got to move with the times.
Yeah.
This happened with Lords, with the Lords Pavilion as well, and golf clubs around the world. Although, interestingly, some golf clubs still exclude women as members. And it gets back to the atmosphere again.
Associates. They're always called it. I remember women at golf clubs are always called associates. But just back on the MCC, I reckon when they were going to rebuild this new stand, John Cain was the Premier at the time, and I reckon because the MCC had said, look, we're not going to have women members, and we'd turn it up. And I think he actually said, I mean, I may be misquoting here, but he told the MCC, if you don't include female members and allow them into the long room, well, then you can build it yourself.
John Cain.
You can pay for it.
You can pay for it yourself.
Yes, he played a starring role in this.
Yeah, I think he did because I remember at the time, wives and girlfriends of mates all saying, we can join the MCC. And I remember a couple of the guys go, yeah, you're going to have to wait 25 years. Nah, we can join immediately. And it was a real
Oh, typical.
Yeah.
But there is
jump a queue and all
it's like being out the front of a nightclub.
Yes. There was a funny quote from the first woman who walked through the doors to get into the MCC Lord's Pavilion.
Yeah.
And she was interviewed after she walked in, and her mother, I think, walked in and had a look around, and her quote was, I don't know what all the fuss is about.
It's just a room.
You know, it's just a room, yeah.
Nice
it is
view,
funny, but
there's plenty of joints.
But that symbolises that the problem for women in sport. You know, you're not allowed. Yeah, and it goes back to ancient Greek times, and I've done this with the book. I mean, look, you know, I do love ancient Greek history, so any opportunity to do some research, I do it. And I found some for this book because the ancient Olympics women weren't allowed to compete.
Yeah.
But they also couldn't sit in the stands and watch unless they were maidens. So if you were single and available, well, that's okay to come and watch.
Right.
It was like they were the original cheerleaders.
Yeah.
You know, that you're okay. It's okay if you're a bit of eye candy, but no other women could watch. So
no, especially no old women or
oh
anything.
God,
no.
That'll ruin the atmosphere.
They could go to the Brownlow.
Stand on the rotisserie.
Stand on the rotisserie. And
one of my favourite things ever. But last year and the year before, we've still had issues around the Carbine Club not allowing women to be a part of it. And the AFL finally, Gillan McLachlan finally saying, well,
he stepped in.
Traditionally, the head of the AFL always speaks there. And he said, well, you're not getting our support and you're not doing it. And they were told, if you can get some women into the club, and it only has to be like, I think they were looking at 3 names were bandied about. So they're going to have just 3 women. That proved impossible for them to do. Yeah. You know, they said, we can't get the membership to agree to it. So it got cancelled. Which it's kind of amazing that that's happening now, you know, like getting 3 women onto the membership role.
1984 sounds recent
bad,
for that, but it was like 3 months ago.
Yeah,
you know,
it was 3 months ago.
You know, Australian football, unlike other football codes around the world, women have been flocking to this game, our Indigenous game. You know, women make up almost, you know, half the memberships now and half the crowd and, you know, have always loved this sport but just haven't felt included. You know, and it's great to see with this new AFL administration that we're seeing some meaningful change. And it's not just AFLW, but it's, you know, Gillan McLachlan's stand with the Carbine Club. It feels like that we have reached a tipping point where, you know, we can't continue to treat women like this.
Are you seeing it amongst other sports? Because we're all fairly well aware of the AFL being sort of Melbourne-based, but are you seeing it in other sports the same way?
Yeah, we are living through some really good change at the moment. And I think by having the women's sporting landscape more competitive, these other sports are feeling the pressure to get their own house in order. So there's a lot of clamouring to be the sport of choice for girls and women. They all say it, they all trot out the line. Well, now they're realising that you actually have to do something to become the sport of choice for girls and women. So, you know, I don't really care who started it, which sport started it. Cricket will say it was the Big Bash, but then you look at the Matildas and the rise of the Matildas, that's played a role here as well. I don't play that Code Wars game. I'm not interested. I'm more interested in the big picture. And the fact is they are all now looking at women. They now recognise that women exist. They play their sport. They love their sport. And they're coming up with better pay and conditions and facilities and access to facilities. And that's a good thing. So it's competitive and it's great. I don't care who started it.
But it also, to me, and you touch on this in your book, and I think the coach of the Diamonds raises this issue, which is the more sports that are here and they're paying good money and the more the pathways are created, it changes the perception to young women and girls that you can start playing a sport at 5 and you can go on and play all the way through. And look, you might go to basketball, you might go to netball, you might go to soccer, you might go to AFL. Cricket, we don't know, but it will get more women actually thinking of themselves as, and being an athlete is a thing to do. And so there's actually, which blokes have always taken for granted. It has always surprised me since the AFLW has been launched, the reaction of some, and it's always seems to be blokes, who kind of see this almost, they compare it directly to the AFL men's, which is no one's ever said, it's not going to instantly be at that level, but probably will never even be the exact same game. It will probably develop in a slightly different style of the game. But they see it as a zero-sum game. Like, if the women's goes well, it's going to take something away from the men's, which is kind of, rather than seeing it as locking in a bigger audience for both, you know, because a lot of people I know, they will watch both forms of the sport.
I've got to be careful what I say here.
I know a lot of guys, right? As a guy, I also know a lot of guys, and a lot of us are jerks. There are a lot of good ones, but
cannot agree more.
Like how miserable do you have to be to hate the AFLW?
I've known a lot of blokes over the years And there are some dead set flogs along the
I've dated a few of them as well. Like, they're out there. But look, I think my response is that is a shrinking audience. So that viewpoint is disappearing and becoming just increasingly irrelevant. So they're often referred to as the footy show audience. Yeah. And, I don't know whether that's fair or not. But I just don't... I choose to ignore it because they are dwindling, those people. And look, it's really about focusing on the future and the views of the kids who are coming through. That's where the change will...
Who will see it as just...
Totally.
They won't even know what you're talking about.
That's what I was saying before. The kids just have latched onto it immediately and know that's just the way it is.
It's like I was on radio the other day and a caller said that I'm going to be watching the AFLW just to see the injuries because there are going to be a lot of injuries. And I just said, mate, you've really got to change your outlook on life. Don't focus on the negatives, okay? There are injuries in all sports. Yeah. If you are tuning in just to watch and almost will there to be injuries,
that's the
you
Formula
are sad.
1 attitude. You just watch it for the crashes.
It's just really sad. But the other point I want to make is, and you touched on comparing men's sport and women's sport.
Yeah.
This is what we have to stop doing. And this is what we have been doing historically, is comparing men and women in sport. We should celebrate both and celebrate their differences because we are different. Thank God we are different. Most of the time, men are going to be faster and stronger.
Yep.
I'm looking at you two. You look stronger than me.
We don't look as fit.
You left out the faster. I noticed you were a bit faster.
I'm thinking that maybe
we could eat more.
if we had a race, the park across the road afterwards, I might give you a good run for your money. But no, I just think it's about...
Especially because we're both drunk.
Yeah. And you've got thongs on too.
What park?
If we just start to view women's sport and celebrate women for being women, we'll get rid of a lot of that mindset. And it is about changing the way you think because, okay, so men are most of the time faster. Does that mean that a cheetah is faster than the gazelle? Is the gazelle a slouch? It doesn't. It's a really pointless argument, and it's one where women have had to, constantly justify their place in sport as athletes because, they are most of the time not as strong or as fast. And I think that's a really important point to make. If we're going to eradicate that casual sexism, let's just change that conversation.
Well, the thing too is watching the AFLW, and I was also watching the Super Netball, the new competition they've got there, which I want to talk to you about in a second. But the love of the game, if you love football, and I mean, I adore football. I mean, I know it's mad and stupid how much we all adore it, but it's such a great thing, and we love it originally. And we often lose this with the professional era of we watch it and care about it, not because of all the nonsense that goes on, because we genuinely just love it. It's great fun. It's fun to play. It's fun to watch. All the things that go with it. And with the women, you're seeing a really pure form because they haven't been able to do this of just enthusiasm for the game. So I can understand, I'd be the first to say, look, the standard is not that good in many ways at the moment, but you can see where it's going. So I don't have a problem with that. You just have to have a slightly bigger view. But to turn around and try and then talk it down as it being terrible, it's sort of sucking a lot of joy out of the game. You have to wonder how much some of these people actually really like.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that everyone has to watch it. It's just this thing of this. People can almost not let it.
It's like, why would it annoy you?
Yeah, it's like they don't like it having its day in the sun. And I'm like, well, you raised some great stats. TV coverage of women's sport. What are the percentages? I've seen a few different ones, but the percentage of TV sports coverage, what percentage is actually women's sport?
Well, at the time I started writing this book in 2015, it was 7%.
Right.
It's gone up, and we are heading in the right direction, but we couldn't get much worse than that.
What's it up now to?
I'm not sure what it is now.
Is it at the heady heights of 10%?
Probably around about 10%.
Right.
So
it's hardly dominating like some people are acting.
It is not,
it's
not dominating by any
10%.
stretch. But I also want to make the point that to strip the argument back to its purest form, girls deserve the same opportunities in sport as boys, you know, and I think we need to just step away and think about what sort of society we want our kids to grow up in. So for those blokes who sit there and complain and looking for injuries and are worried about it threatening the men's code, just think about what sort of life and society you want for your daughter and your son. You know, and it is not fair to deny girls and women the chance to test their bodies to the limit. Men have been doing it for a long time. It's now you really don't have a leg to stand on if you're going to deny women that opportunity. It's a sad, outdated argument.
Yeah, it's missing the key point of a lot of this, which is enabling people to play this game that we all love at the highest level, like as many people as possible. It's the same reason, you know, we're trying to expand it to new communities in Australia. It's also why, weirdly, we're going to China to play in a smog field. Okay. You know, all right, maybe that's
okay. There you're going too far now.
So it is kind of amazing, but it is heartening, though, to see that I think raw numbers speak more than often what you hear on the social media kind of megaphone, which is people are voting with their feet and with their viewing habits, and they're often the silent ones because people don't run around as much. Like, if you like something, you just sort of like it and watch it. They don't necessarily go on. And so you're seeing good numbers. The AFL numbers are good, and I think the netball numbers were pretty good, the new competition over the weekend as well. So
netball's done the right thing, as hard as it was to sort of break away from New Zealand. And
that's what they've done, hasn't it, for people who don't know?
They
were a competition that was 6 Australian teams and 5 New Zealand teams?
It was a cross-Tasman competition with, how many did we have? 4 and 4? What's that? I can't even remember now.
I think it's, yeah.
But look, they had to cut ties with New Zealand because the New Zealand-based teams weren't as strong. And
New Zealand's always been dragging us down, let's be honest.
Well, look, it just...
Other than rugby,
you know,
they're just... They take the code of the entire world.
Yeah, they are a strong netball nation, but in this competition, they weren't as strong as the Australian teams. We had more depth here. So we decided to go a different way and just have the Australian teams and create some new teams. And it was the right thing to do, absolutely, to grow the sport and to get to sort of tap into that amount of talent that we have here. The Super Netball is fantastic.
The Australian women that play netball at a high level, because there were less teams in the last competition, a lot of them didn't get to play at the highest opportunity. Level. So now with more, we're getting our players actually be able to play at a high level more regularly.
Yes. And netball's an interesting case study because it's always been a high participation sport, but hasn't been able to get that rusted on sponsorship support and a TV network to treat it with respect. So there's been that sort of that problem for netball, and that is hopefully being resolved now with the Nine Network being involved and showing games on free-to-air TV and at a sensible hour. So in the past, netball's been hidden, whether it's been at 11 o'clock at night when girls can't watch it.
Level. Look, I don't know what point this proves, but I remember in netball sense, one of the more amazing things I've seen on TV, probably 10, 12 years ago, we're up in Airlie Beach in far north Queensland, Saturday afternoon or early Saturday evening, in a bar in Airlie Beach. You know, it's full of backpackers, it's full of travellers,
and you
and me, and a whole bunch of bikies have roared up. Right, about 30 bikies in the full colours and the whole shebang. So they all walked in. The whole place went a bit quiet, but they were fine. They just drank their pots. On comes Australia versus New Zealand in the netball, right? Your traditional clash of rivals, you know, those two had each other. And it was, as it always seems to happen between Australia and New Zealand in the netball, it went down to about the last goal. It was like 51 to 52. By the last 30 seconds of the game, the entire bar was screaming and yelling, including the bikies. And when Australia got the last goal and won, it was like, you see the footage of when Australia won the America's Cup in 1983. The entire bar went nuts. And I remember my wife saying, who's a mad netballer, she said, just look at that. Just look at the reaction from this crowd in the bar. And that was, again, I don't know what point this is making, but that was probably the last time I watched a game of netball on TV. And this is where getting the domestic competition on the telly is going to help them enormously.
And also having it regularly. Like that's the thing that's happened why the AFL Women's has been so successful because straight away, like when I saw Melbourne play their first game in the Women's and they lost, I was really bitter they lost, but because I've got that connection.
Surprised,
yes.
Not surprised, like well rehearsed of how to deal with it. But it does mean now I have to drink twice as much. But
they'll probably win a premiership before your men.
Oh, it's no question.
Probably.
Like, put your house on that.
Yeah, that's right. But you do.
Especially when they move Jack Watts into the women's team, which is he's not far away at the minute.
He wouldn't get a slot. That's the thing here, though. They You know, that's where netball, because it hasn't regularly been on television, and they have chopped and changed the teams a lot in netball, which is a bit like the NBL. It does make it hard to kind of build up that club loyalty.
Yes.
You can't get that intergeneration. Like, you know, I remember
Big
barracking
Bash
for the
League have done it,
Yes.
though.
You know, and the Vixens
And now it's the
now,
Vixens,
and now
yes.
it's anyone who's playing Collingwood.
And in basketball, you know, the Southeast Melbourne Magic.
I went for the North Melbourne Giants. Like, they
North
did the
Melbourne
same
Giants.
thing. But this is the thing where netball's sort of struggled to stick around in a form that you can get those generational rusted-on sponsors and supporters you mentioned before. Do you think this will be a step? They can have a bit more stability now.
Absolutely. It was the right thing to do, and it still takes time. It takes time to build up rivalries. But, you know, being on free-to-air TV, a couple of games on a Saturday night will, at a early hour, will just help so much.
But
I mean, it's about visibility.
Too,
it's about
helps.
visibility. And women's sport has been a sacrificial lamb. You know, when something has to go, well, we get rid of women's sport. Yeah. So it's terrific that sponsors and media...
Back to money with TV networks and what have you. They go, well, we you know, it costs just as much to telecast a women's game as it does a men's, but we only get 20% of the dollars back. So... What do we get rid of?
Okay, so the thing about the money argument and the market never lies. I've got some problems with that argument.
Oh, no doubt, but I'm just saying that's always been traditionally from a TV network. That's their view. That's the reason.
Yes.
We only get 20% of the revenue from the women's sport. So when times are tough, that's the one we'll keep. The one that brings us in 80%.
I saw last week, and Channel 9, good on for giving this deal. They were showing the netball on Gem. It was on the second channel.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I flicked onto the first channel because why are they showing it on Gem? They must have something big on thing. It was Crocodile Dundee. And I was like, are you serious? Like, you know, like it's good that you show, but why isn't it on the main channel if you're going to have... I mean, it's not like they're replaying something where you go, well, that'll have the sponsors flocking. Like, it's Crocodile Dundee. It's a 1986 movie anyway.
Look, baby steps, isn't it? I mean,
but you say that's not necessarily true.
Well, the thing about the market never lying is that long before the market forces kicked in, there was sexism and attitudes towards women in sport that have kept them sidelined. So those people, the market, they're making their decisions with conscious and unconscious bias in their heads. So there are men sitting around a mahogany table and their starting position is that sport is mainly men's business.
A lot of mahogany tables getting around.
That's where that
it normally
sexism.
is. Yeah. It does.
So
we have to change. We have to. I haven't got mahogany at home. We have to change the way we think. So that starting position has to be that there are women who play our sport. There are women who love sport. There are women who play our sport very well. And let's invest in them. You know, let's market them properly. Let's talk to the right kinds of sponsors because there are sponsors out there who have flocked to AFLW, which other sports should see as a really good thing, that they want to align their brand with something that's progressive and empowering and great for society. So, you know, people say to me, you know, basketball can't get its act together. Well, I think basketball can take some heart from the fact that this very masculine sport of Australian rules has managed to get an elite national competition off the ground with some really good sponsors. So I think it bodes well for other sports.
The AFL Women's also puts pay to the lie, where I would argue that currently the standard of AFLW isn't anywhere near as good as, say, netball is as a sport, which has been around a lot longer, and even basketball and hockey roos and Southern Stars. Like, to me, they're at a higher standard for their sport comparatively than. So it shows it's not all even about that argument of it's not as good or it's not at the level. it's always a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy where they don't show women's sport, or they show it sparingly and chop it around and market it terribly, and then go, doesn't rate.
Yeah.
You know, so it sort of is like, it's chicken and the egg a bit, because it's sort of like they don't invest in it in the past because of that. And what's going to be interesting is they've taken 9 with the netball, Channel 7 with and Foxtel with the AFLW. They have taken a bit of a risk in their original minds that this was a bit of a risk and it might not work out. But then they did a few little tests, and it's almost like you can feel how surprised the AFL are.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
You know, they are generally, hang on, this might actually be okay. I
know for a fact that when the ratings came out after the first week of the AFLW, particularly the Carlton Collingwood, there were the execs at Channel 7, they sweat on the ratings every morning for whatever show. But this one had added interest, and there was an enormous amount of, Jesus, have a look at that.
We better start taking this seriously.
And what does that tell us? Do you think, women have been underestimated our entire lives?
Yeah.
Now, so they underestimated it. And I think there's also sometimes a lack of understanding about how much society has evolved. So,
I think that's spot on. I think a lot of this, let's not tell the Channel 9 commentary team that women are into sport, because it'll probably shock them.
Well,
again, the people who were so shocked at the high ratings were, of course, old blokes, middle-aged blokes.
Yeah.
And I know there was also a couple in that meeting is, how much do we sell this for? Triple it. Go back and see if you can get triple of dollars out of the agencies.
So for me, and I've been quite emotional about AFLW. I think I cried in the first week, the second and the third, because it is
and you
connected.
Weren't even injured.
No, I've become quite emotional ever since I had my baby. No, but for me, it's connected to something much bigger. It is much bigger. This is about. It brings women together, and women who don't even like football have been turning up in droves to watch it because it is about celebrating a victory. This is women who have stared convention in the face and who are now playing our great game at the highest level. It's like it's a universal struggle for equal rights that connects all women. And so for me, these women, and I may be overstating it a little bit, but they feel like modern suffragists to me. They are playing a traditionally masculine sport. They've stuck with this code, and they now have an elite national competition after 100 years. It is such a powerful and moving time in our sporting history, and the players get it. I wondered whether I was the only one feeling like this because I'm a feminist, and I know, and I've studied feminism, and I'm wired a particular way. But then when I was in the rooms after Adelaide Bulldogs the other Friday night, and just watching my players celebrate and jump and sing the song and hug each other, and a couple of them said they'd bought my book, I just thought, wow, these women, they totally get it. They get that they are changing society.
They bought your book on the salaries that they're on playing AFLW.
Yeah.
I saw a photo the other day on Instagram and thought, now this single photograph, this should actually almost be the promo for Channel 7 or the AFLW. It was, it could have been Daisy Pearce. It was one of the Melbourne players signing an autograph to a young boy. Not a young girl.
Yes.
It was like a 12-year-old boy wanting her autograph. And I thought, that single image, that's what they should be using in their promos.
Yeah.
The two of them just summed up the whole thing.
I think the thing about the AFL, if you live in Victoria, and not to be too Victorian-centric, but footy in Victoria and Melbourne, it's not about sport. It politically controls so much of, so much. If you don't live in Melbourne, you don't get the intensity of every person on any board of a major company will sit and chat with you about football. It's, the things that if you're a football star, and we've talked about this before on this podcast, if you can glass a woman and still get a top job in the AFL media if you were good at football once. The power of football will forgive all sins, but it also gets you entry into boardrooms. It gets you,
correct.
So for women, this is also about more than sport, and it's also reflecting in See, I have no problem with women playing football. Where I get worried is when women are being allowed on AFL boards and stuff. And the reason is, reason I get upset about that is because for unqualified men like me, it means my chance of getting on boards is significantly reduced.
Yeah.
So, this is a zero-sum game for me. I've always wanted to be on a footy board. And now that they're putting women on, I'm in trouble because I don't have any skills to sell myself, and there's no reason I should be put on the board except I am a white man.
Yeah,
a proud white man.
Having no reason or skill set to get on an AFL board, it's never stopped anyone in the past.
Well, this is the thing. Like, when people say, board should be merit-based, I'm like, have you met any of these boards? Like, you obviously have
merit as a concept has been so skewed in favour of men because men have leadership qualities, but just simply because they are men.
Well, it's not even merit. Now, we got off to a very rocky start, though, with women on board, I have to say, where it was Elaine Finlay was the first, 1985. I got this from your book. But she was elected to the Fitzroy board, so it didn't work out well, did it? Do you think that was why they collapsed?
Right, it's been it was always
club, right?
it's always going to be difficult after that.
Isn't it like boats? It's bad luck to have a woman on them. That's what I'd always been told. So, am I reading that wrong? Is that an outdated view?
It's slightly outdated, but it is a problem for women who do manage to crash through all these barriers and to get on a board or co-hosting a sports radio show in the morning or whatever.
You feel like the very first.
Yes, I was the first. The problem with that is you just feel this weight and this burden that you can't stuff up because you are representing the hopes and aspirations of all women. And it's okay for men to stuff up, and you mentioned one earlier. Stuffed up in it.
Could mention a few that I'll be for another hour.
And they survive. They get second chances, third chances, fourth chances. And if you're a woman who's trying to crash through, you're not given the chance to grow into a role. We've seen that with Kelly Underwood when she was commentating. Men are just given so much time to learn their craft, but for women, it's been more difficult than that. So on boards, well, I don't know. How do you feel about affirmative action? Are those two words? Do they send you into a deep despair?
My real view of it is, it's so. The argument is so. I think you have to have quotas. I'm a believer in quotas because I think we've seen that the commitment of companies and sporting clubs towards this stuff means nothing. Unless you have a hard target and they enforce it, which they all apply to money and advertising revenue and crowds and everything else has a hard target. So I never believe any sporting organisation or political organisation or business organisation when they say they're committed to something because, it's like
Words.
I'm committed to losing weight.
Or it's like a new government.
I'm fine until someone,
gives
there's
you
a fried
a pie.
chicken shop open up the road.
It's like governments are committed to open and transparent.
Like they're all
Every
committed.
new political leader says
so
that.
I think you do
and
have
then they strengthen the Freedom of
I think
Information
you do have
Act.
to have, and luckily in doing this and just my life, I've met a lot of board members of AFL clubs. Of big businesses too and all this. And so I've met them and there are individuals that are brilliant, really good, blokes, really good. And then there is, because it's mainly blokes, and then there are a bunch on it that are on there because they're friends of friends or if you met them, you wouldn't let them mind your house if you're on holidays. Like the idea that this is all a merit-based is the biggest joke that people put up because I just say you obviously haven't met these boards. And that's not saying there's not good ones. So the idea that there aren't enough qualified women, like equality would be dangerously incompetent women having just as great a chance of being on a board as dangerously incompetent men.
I'm all for that.
That's true equality.
That's right, but that is equality. Like the idea that
there should be more idiot women on boards to match the idiot blokes.
Footy supporters should know this because we've all had club administrations that have almost run us into the ground. There's very few that we
Melbourne
don't know.
have had about 8 administrations in a row that have been
and I believe women can run footy clubs into the ground just as well as men, to be honest.
Well, have you heard Beverly Knight talk about
Beverly Knight was the only one at Melbourne. She's been the only woman at Melbourne.
Well, that was Bev O'Connor. But Beverly Knight at Essendon has spoken about, what she may have done differently during the Essendon drugs saga. Yeah, a whole lot. So the thing is, there's so much evidence that diversity on boards makes good business sense.
Yeah.
More different perspectives, more rigorous debate, different life experience. The whole thing, it's so damn obvious. But sport sport has been, it's a bubble, you know, and sport has been a good decade behind the rest of society. Yeah. And it's really hard for, you know, for common sense to penetrate that bubble. And, you know, the good news is that we're starting to see it now, finally, some gender equality in sport.
But you talk about in your book that there's this, a lot of the comments that are made about women by sports journalists, and you give the Bouchard being interviewed and asked to do a twirl in the tennis to show off her dress.
That's right.
And you give a bunch
and that wasn't 80 years ago. That was last
2 years ago. Not the
casual sexism.
But there's a lot of these examples you give of male sports reporters and sport and athletes giving not even vaguely, not even casual sexism really. It's just out and out sexism. And you give examples of this, and then you say in one bit, you say, you know, perhaps it's partly because there just aren't enough female sports journalists around, which, you know, you would have seen being one of the first that kind of, you know, came through, and there weren't many other women. And I do agree in some ways there's a normalising aspect of if you actually have women and men around, it kind of changes the debate, and people get to see it through a woman's eyes a bit because they're around and actually start to see how ridiculous it is. But do you also think that's giving some of these blokes that say these things a bit of an easy pass, in that, you know, to me, I've never really thought it's that difficult. I don't pretend to know what it feels like to be a woman and be instantly excluded, because most of the barriers that I see women facing, I've never faced, right? So I can't.
But you know very well how it is to be a man and be excluded.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But that's because of my own personality and choices, right? But I kind of have always looked at it and thought, even though I don't know what that feels like completely, I can put my brain into second gear and actually have some level of insight and empathy of what it must feel like to have that happen regularly. Now, I'm not pretending that it equates to I can understand fully, but the argument that blokes don't understand, to me, or can't quite get it, not that you didn't make, I'm just extrapolating from some of that stuff. These blokes, they're not really, to me, they're not with the times, but they're also not like trying to understand. They're almost willfully deciding that.
Yes.
Do you know?
I know what you're saying, but that probably doesn't take into account the power of social conditioning. Yeah. So the problem is that, you know, we are labelled with gender stereotypes, you know, from birth. You know, when you have a girl baby, she wears pink, and a boy wears blue, and away we go. The gender stereotypes kick in very early. So I think I'm not letting them off the hook, but it's pervasive, this way of thinking. Yeah. And in tennis, getting back to the twirl, a lot of men and women still see a woman athlete, they see her beauty before her athleticism. Yeah. They see her as an attractive woman before athlete. And I think that way of thinking, it's really hard to undo that. So tennis is successful, and tennis gets a lot of media coverage because it's not really challenging gender norms, because the women are wearing, most of the time, skirts. They're not crashing into each other. They're not really challenging what it means to be a man or a woman.
3 sets versus 5 sets in the women in the tennis?
And on this, most of the women I've spoken to want to play best of 5. Yeah. So I know it gets a lot of airplay, this argument, and it gets linked to equal pay, and it shouldn't, because it's a sporting argument. It's a separate argument, the best of 3 or best of 5. And the women don't make the decision. The WTA doesn't even make the decision. It is higher than that. So they are playing best of 3.
A bunch of blokes make the decision.
A bunch of blokes make the decision. So I think there's a strong argument for the blokes to maybe play best of 3, because tennis can drag on a bit. But the equal pay argument is something quite separate, and I hate it when the two arguments get blurred.
I'd like to see Bernard Tomic play 3 sets for 1.
Give it a try. What I love about that equal pay argument in tennis, about the 5 and the 3 sets, is all these blokes get upset and go, well, you don't hear the women complaining when they get paid the same amount for less work. And I'm like, guys, we're winning this equal pay thing like 99% of the time. Do you really want to point to the only example that pretty much exists in history where we've lost? Like, we used to win 100%, now it's like 99%. And guys legitimately complained, and you're like, really? Let's keep this issue. You know when something would happen at like home or something, and you knew you were a bit in the wrong, but it wasn't you. You just go quiet. You just like go to your room, let your parents fight with your brother or sister about it, because you go, I'm not on firm ground. Like, even though I haven't done this time, I'm not on firm ground here. And that's how I feel about the equal pay. Like, maybe the women are getting a slight advantage there in doing less. Okay, so what? Like, it's one example that you can point to.
Well, but the path to becoming a professional tennis player is the same for men and women. They are putting in the same amount of effort and time and sweat and forehands and backhands and dummy spits and grunting and shrieking. They're all doing it. They're all doing a hell of a lot of it. The thing about the way to sort of counter it is, if the Australian cricket team wins a test match in 3 days, should they be paid less?
Well, personally, I think they should most of the time.
I think you lost that entire argument when you say the Australian Test team won a match in 3 days.
You are paid
should the Australian Test team be paid less? Yes.
Yes, I was going to say winning an Australian Test team.
I guess. Winning one.
Well, okay, so, you are paid for winning. You're not paid for how long it takes to convert your match point.
To your point, the women would play 5.
They would.
It's not like they're going, we're feeling a bit lazy.
About it. It wasn't the pay thing so much as the 3 versus 5, because it's like, and again, just here's another question just straight out of nowhere. In the Olympics, the men compete in the decathlon, 10 events, but the women, it's the heptathlon, max, 7 events. Other than ancient history, when the Olympics started, is there any real reason why that continues to this day? There
is no biological reason why women shouldn't have the same events as men, and competing against women, of course, not competing against men. So they should be swimming the 1,500 metres.
You're right.
At the Olympics, they absolutely should be.
800.
Yep, 800. One more thing.
Has a woman ever swum 1,500?
I
bet there's men going, they couldn't do it. They probably
do it.
You know the interesting thing
laps,
about
30 laps? No.
My favourite thing about swimming and women is for a long time women weren't allowed to swim because it was all about fear of maybe seeing their ankles or something. This was the legitimate concern people had about. In the first few Olympics when women were allowed to compete, they tried terrible to see anyone's ankles. Male or female, I don't want to see them.
Each other's ankles.
But this is literally the argument they used to have. They used to say, the ankle should be hidden, and they used to only let women at first in the Olympics compete when women were only in the stands.
Right.
Like, heaven forbid a man. The excitement of seeing a woman in a full head-to-toe swimming suit.
Might be too much.
Well, this is the thing I found interesting. As recently, and this is why you wonder about swimming, no wonder they're not swimming the 1,500 when you read this. In 1956, the Australian Swimming Union had rules in place. So in 56, year of the Melbourne Olympics, not ancient times, they said that women's swimsuits needed to be semi-woolen and have a skirt.
Right.
And you go, well, no wonder women didn't want to participate much in swimming. They're basically an attempt to drown them.
No wonder Dawn Fraser had a bit of a chip on her shoulder.
Well, she did. Yeah. She was one of the few that was the first to move away from a woolen swimsuit, because they started to say, hey, maybe putting yourself in something that doesn't get heavier as it gets wet.
It just sounds so dangerous.
And also a skirt. Skirt, is there anything like less, the pull through the water? You want it semi-wool.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't let them get away. There was quite an argument to get away from wool. I mean, it's not even to do with the look.
No.
It's like, let's make this as inaccessible as humanly possible. And then
because sport is men's business.
But it also makes you wonder why, no wonder they couldn't swim 1,500. Basically,
it's like swimming with a parachute behind you, dragging through the water.
None of the men could swim 1,500 if you put them in a skirt and a woolen top.
That's right. I just want to say one more thing about tennis that I just have to say. Tennis has equal pay for the majors and a few other, decent tournaments because of Billie Jean King. So this is an important point, because here is a woman who disrupted business as usual. And this is what you have to do to create change. You have to make some noise. And it is really difficult as a woman in sport to make noise. And in my book, I think the most powerful chapter is the one about complicity, about how I have been complicit as well, because it's a hell of a lot easier to not rock the boat. But then you read about Billie Jean King, going on strike. We're not going to play until you show some respect here. And this is what we have to do. We have to speak out. And I know that the AFL cops a lot of flack, but I have to applaud Gillon McLachlan for taking a stand here. And, I know it's to do with making money and it makes good business sense, but he also mentions it's the right thing to do to have the AFLW, and it was his decision to bring the thing forward 3 years, and that should be celebrated.
And when he brought it forward, it didn't look like it was going to be the success it is now. There was a lot of...
It sounded like a bit of a risky venture then.
The belief at the time was... and I remember talking to people in the AFL about this at the time before he announced it, is it'll make no money, no one will show up to watch it, we're going to have to pay any TV network to show it, so we're going to, so it's something we need to do for like sort of corporate social responsibility. Think of it like a branding, marketing exercise, but in terms of an actual thing, look, we wish it would work, but it wouldn't. Now, Gillon came in and said, I'm bringing it forward 2 years, and I think in doing that, he needs to get the recognition for that, because he's brought it forward and he's basically said it's not going to be as good as if we'd waited a bit longer and developed the pathways better and all that. And we see women running around in the AFLW. They say, last year was a hockey player, last year was a netball player, last year played ultimate frisbee. So, they literally, and some of them don't know, they say this is their 6th game ever of the game. So, it has been brought forward, and that means it's not going to be perfect. But the way it's actually responded, the credit isn't always there for what was actually a very risky decision.
Yes, I mean, I interviewed him about this, and he said he didn't know if society was ready. He didn't know if his own people in football were ready, but he had a hunch, he had a feeling that it could work. But he certainly couldn't say 100% this thing was going to work.
Yeah.
I felt more, I just felt more positive about it from the beginning, as I did about the crowd for the opening game, because, just being a woman.
One thing Gillon would not have predicted, that he would have been standing outside Princes Park apologising to people because they couldn't get in.
I wish he'd do it when there was a game at Etihad.
But I had friends going who don't even like footy. Yeah. So I knew that there were people, all my friends were going, and it was always going to be big.
And do you think that will keep up? The other big thing is people are saying, we'll just start to drop off, which it hasn't really. It's gone to sort of getting 7,000 to 8,000 a game. Look, roughly.
The momentum is there, and it's only going to get stronger, as you touched on, as the younger girls playing who don't have to drop out and try another sport. They'll stick with Australian rules. The players will get better. The competition will get stronger. The AFL will be able to increase the number of teams. But the other thing they're doing right is the timing. The 8 weeks before the men start proper. To allow this thing to become sustainable for 100, 200, 300 years. I think they've made the right decision on most of the discussions.
One of the most surprising things is that the AFL seem to have got it right on multiple levels. Which is
the fact that nothing sexist has been done. They're not dressing them in bikinis. Like we jokingly said, but thought the odds of someone doing something stupid as this came to fruition were high. And they've not put a foot wrong. So we should say it's been a pleasure having you on. We should mention the book is Breaking the Mould, taking a hammer to sexism in sport. And we've learnt from today that there is sexism in sport.
It's something I wasn't aware of.
Do you know what?
And I must have a go at my staff for not
briefing you on all the...
Not briefing me that there was actually something there to be
It's a great read. It's actually a very fun read.
I'm being stupid. I actually have read the book. It's a great read.
You put a lot of humour in throughout the book, as well as... You kind of, it's the sugar to make the medicine go down.
Well,
and it actually is a very uplifting book by the end.
Yes.
It's very up to date to what's happening now.
Well, here's the thing. When I started writing it, it was early 2015. And the book that I had in mind then was very different to the one that came out, because this was before a lot of great things happened for women in sport. But as soon as I signed with Affirm Press, great things started happening for women in sport. So clearly
You've got to sign for another book deal.
I've got magical powers, Serge.
Obviously.
You know, I can make great things happen. Just bathe in my order.
fault.
Well, but after that, it was the Matildas at the World Cup and Michelle Payne and the new netball and the new AFL competition. Great things happened. So the book did have to change its structure and focus a bit, which threw everybody into a panic. And so now it is a book of two halves. The first half talks about the problems in sport, but the second half is this rollicking ride because it's all about the change. And at last, after 20 years in sport, I am witnessing some meaningful change. And gosh, it does feel good.
Well, it's a pleasure having you on. You've opened up a new world to Serge and I.
Oh, there's no question. It has been a pleasure having you on the Variety Hour, Ange. But before we let you go, there's one very important thing we need to ask you.
Okay.
The Crows this year, what do you see?
2 premierships. Women and men.
On that note, this has been Angela Pippos on the Titus and Sergio Variety Hour.
Oh, well, we'll see you next week.
Bye.